Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Universalist, for having us. Is that how we call it? Yeah.
It's Unitarian.
Unity Unitarian Universalist. Wait, Unity Unitarian, not Universalist.
Correct. Right.
Okay.
It's a long, tawdry story.
I was talking about that. So my part tonight will take about 10 minutes, and I'm going to explain a bit about why I started the project and why I still do it. I've actually shortened this speech each time that I've done it. But I'm certain that giving everyone this information prior to us talking and asking questions is needed to understand the project and to understand why the project is important and why I continue to do it. To start this recording, I'm recording the discussion using the microphone with hope of possibly making this into a podcast through the website. All the recordings from interviews that I do and events that I've done through the project are used as educational material for others to learn about gender. So my hope with recording tonight is to display it on the website to help others understand. If for any reason you don't want yourself recorded, or if you have a question and you don't want that to be recorded, just let me know that before you ask the question, and I can go back and I can edit that out. All right? It's not recording video or anything, so. All right, so speaking of questions, I hope that people are here tonight using this as an opportunity to learn about gender. Tonight is a safe space to ask things as long as they are respectful and non-challenging. It's okay that if you hear a word or a phrase that you haven't heard before, for you at least to interrupt me and ask what that means. I prefer that, as opposed to afterwards people asking questions that like, oh, you didn't know what I was talking about the whole time, right? So tonight I'd like to start out by introducing myself in the same way I've learned to introduce myself through each of the interviews for the project. This practice is the same way we can all learn to introduce ourselves when meeting people, and it shows others that you want to respect them and invites them to give their pronouns as well. So, hello, my name is Brent, and I use he, him, his pronouns. Tonight I have Hal and Rue with me. Rue or Dot?
Either's fine.
Either's fine, okay. Would you two mind introducing yourself so they can see other people do that?
Yeah, my name is Hal, and I use he, him.
And my name's Rue. I use they, them, their pronouns.
Is there anyone else here in the room that would like to introduce themselves? We might have a chance to do that when we ask questions later, too.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. I can do my pronoun introduction.
Sure, please.
My name is Jesse, and I don't care what pronoun you use with me.
Okay.
But I was worried that that's a little bit concussive and dismissive. But in a non-gendered relationship, I don't think we're going to have sex. I don't think my gender matters. And so that's how I responded as part of the conversation.
Okay. Do we have anything to say about that right now, or wait till maybe later? Well, maybe bring that up after we do the gallery walk too, and we can have more of an open discussion about it then. Well, it's that easy. If you're curious about what pronouns someone may use, then you share your own, introducing yourself, and then that invites them to do it. Most of the time, it's as simple as saying your name and giving your pronouns. Sometimes people choose to say how they identify away from pronouns as well. Because the project highlights people who currently or previously have used gender nonconforming pronouns, I do feel it's important to indicate to everyone that I personally am cisgender, and that's how I identify. Is there anyone in the room? So again, is there anyone in the room who doesn't know what cisgender means? Okay. So in that case, you're welcome to raise your hand and ask, because I'd rather that people understand the language that we're using. Cisgender means that I use the pronouns I was given at birth. So my mom gave birth to me. The doctors looked at my body. They declared I was a boy, and today I identify as a man. All right. Through the project, I've learned to use this as an opportunity to give and share more about how I identify as well. I identify as a husband, a dog dad, a hopefully soon to be parent through adoption. I identify as a small business owner, a photographer, an artist, and an activist. And although it's important that people understand that sexuality is not directly related to gender, I'm proud to share that I identify as gay, bisexual, and queer. For some of you here today, you will hear me and others give our pronouns and mentioning how we identify. And there's a chance you might say to yourself, okay, I think I get this now. I want to respect these people, but first I need to better understand the part of them that makes them different from me. It's important to me now that people understand that trans and gender nonconforming folk are not different, because we all have pronouns. We all want people to see who we are. We want people to see us as who we feel we are. And in the least, we don't want people to see us as something that we know we're not. Now, I think most would agree that the best way to try and understand people is to try and put yourself into others' shoes. Something I've discovered through speaking about the project with others is that with gender, many times people don't do this correctly. So oftentimes people say it's really hard for me to think about being a different gender from what I've always known. And this is not the case with trans and gender nonconforming folks. You actually have to imagine yourself as exactly who you are, exactly how you feel, but then imagine that most of the time or all of the time that people assume you aren't what you know yourself to be. And in some cases, they assume the opposite of who you are. So not just every so often when you meet this one person who also always forgets your name. It happens with strangers. It happens sometimes with people at work, at a doctor's office, and sometimes even with your own family. So it's pretty personal. We're growing in here. I'm glad we didn't sit at the
Beast that
couches.
way sometimes.
So what's different about the people in the project is the fact that most often people don't see them as who they are. And unfortunately, this is something gender nonconforming people deal with every day. And all they really want is for people to see them as who they are, and it doesn't get any more simple than that. So to me, this project is now about sharing people, showing people how easy it is to take time to show that we care about others. It's about asking people questions to better understand one another and taking responsibility for ourselves to show that we want to respect them. Before I give the stage to Hal and Rue, I'll give you the very much abbreviated story of how this project got started for me. It began with my own ignorance on the subject of gender. So the first time someone asked me if I had heard of people using they, them, their pronouns, I stated that I had never heard of anything like that before. I said I understood how people could feel a different gender than what they were assigned at birth, but to me you were either a guy or a girl, because that's what we were taught, and that's the way it is. And I said they is a word that describes more than one person. I also said people wanting me to use pronouns like they were probably just looking for attention. And I said, you can't just make up new pronouns and expect the whole world to change. These are things we all have probably either said or at least heard other people say about this subject. And there was one day that my husband heard me say those phrases to another person and stopped me abruptly, as he often does when I'm making bold opinions about things I have not taken my time to educate myself about. And he said, you grew up being upset by the fact that people didn't take the time to acknowledge your sexuality as bisexual. You still talk about how that hurts you. How on earth can you say that someone else is or isn't what they say they are? Now, to make it real simple, my husband is always right. But this time, I also realized I was really wrong. I realized then and there I needed to change this concept I had in my own head about gender being a man and woman, or woman. And if I didn't, it meant I was deciding to disrespect people. I considered all the ways I could to learn about transgender people. I Googled a lot of information. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. in that process, a thought came to me that maybe I could document my development of learning to also help other people. I've had some success with photo campaigns in the past, so I started to think of how I could start a new one with this subject. And by chance, I had a photo shoot where someone asked me to use they them pronouns when photographing them. I asked that subject if I could ask them questions about their journey to using they them pronouns, and we ended up stopping the shoot and talking for about an hour. And this is what sparked an idea for the project. I invited other people to come in to be photographed, and through that process, I once again found myself asking those same questions I was asking to the first person, all to better understand gender for myself. And it didn't take me long to realize that those questions I was asking those people were the same questions and answers that everyone else wanted to hear. So spur of the moment, I asked permission, and I threw a camera on a tripod to start recording the conversations with the next couple people who came in to be photographed for the project. And this all led to me doing interviews. After starting the video interviews for the project, I realized I wasn't giving people who were watching those videos the chance to gain everything that I was gaining from the interviews, simply because I had to edit them down for YouTube conversations, basically. And today, I now do podcasts, which are lengthy interviews and conversations with these people. And I'm absolutely certain that people can gain the most from this project by listening to the full interviews and hearing about these people's stories. My goal now with the project is to work with individuals who are leaders in the community, giving them space to be seen and heard, and to allow everyone who listens to the interviews a chance to educate themselves about gender diversity simply by listening to these amazing people. So that is it for my story and about me. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Unity Church for giving us a place to be seen and heard and to educate others who are willing to listen. I also want to thank the over now 35 people that I've worked with through the project who have given me the incredibly unique space and trust, not only to listen to their stories, but also to share them. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about myself or the project when we get to the open discussion and questions and answers. Otherwise, I'm honored to give the floor to Hal and Rue, who I hope will tell all of you a little bit about themselves to start. Thank you both for being here and always being willing to help with the project.
You want me
Okay,
to?
I can do it.
Okay.
So, hi again, my name is Hal. Again, I use he, him pronouns. I previously used they, them pronouns as well. I can get into why if people are curious at some point. So I am an actor and a theater maker in town. I'm a recent graduate of U since May. I also am a teacher, tutor as well for some of my side jobs. I identify as a trans man. I identify as queer, both in my gender and my sexuality. And I also identify as a gay man. So that, and gender non-conforming. So that's where I'm at. That's what I got. What introduction do you got?
So I'm Rue again. My full name is Rue.ether. It's actually, I use Rue.ether, I use they, them pronouns. Rue.ether is not my given name. I've actually chosen that myself. And in April, it will be my legal name. I'll be changing it, which I'm very excited about. Hal and I are actually really good friends. We've known each other since our first year of college, 5 years ago or so. About 4 years ago, 3 years ago, or somewhere around there, I started using they, them pronouns, came out to my family. I also graduated from the U in psychology. I work in an apartment complex right now, so that's cool. I identify as agender and genderqueer. For me, agender means I have no gender, which can be a confusing concept. I also identify as genderqueer, also as trans. They're kind of terms that kind of coalesce together in a sense. Yeah, I guess that's me for now.
So it's very loose structure tonight.
Great.
What we
Amazing.
I don't have anything else prepared. You don't have to listen to me talk for a long time anymore. What I would invite everyone to do, unless everyone has like seen everything they would want to out there, we could go out to the hall, look at some of the pieces for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then come back in here, and maybe you'll have more questions from there. Unless people have questions right now. Just yeah.
And I walked in a little late, so maybe you've talked about some of this. Can you talk some, when you use terms queer and transgender nonconforming, what does that mean? I don't know what that means.
Yeah, so I think these terms mean like a little bit something different for everyone, right?
Yep.
In the sort of most general sense, like a lot of times transgender or trans, just shortened, is used as sort of the umbrella term for people who don't identify the gender they were assigned at birth. That can mean anything from like you identify as having no gender, you identify as like a man, a woman, any gender. It's used as an umbrella term a lot. That being said, there are non-binary, genderqueer people who don't so outside of the categories of man and woman, who don't identify as trans. So just because someone is non-binary, genderqueer doesn't make them trans, but a lot of people will use it when referring to that community sort of overall. I think as far as like gender non-conforming for me is about like, for me, is like, so as a trans man, I'm not gender non-conforming because I'm a man, I'm gender non-conforming because I don't adhere to like the norms of what a man should be. So I feel like as a gay man, the way I express myself, or as just a queer person, doesn't adhere to sort of our typical standards of like a masculine man. And so that makes me gender non-conforming as a man, not as someone who was assigned female at birth. You want to talk about genderqueer a little bit more? What does genderqueer mean?
Yeah, genderqueer to me, I most heavily identify with the term non-binary, and like I said, that to me is without a gender. For me, having no gender, but genderqueer too is. These are all terms that are somewhat synonymous, but depending on the person, they might think they're very different. And to me, genderqueer, agender, like those are kind of synonymous a little bit. Genderqueer is, and trans even though trans is like this, in general, an overarching umbrella term. Genderqueer to me is kind of like we said, kind of just not identifying with the gender you were assigned at birth. And it's kind of weird, so I was assigned male at birth. Everyone's typically assigned something when they're born, like male or female or whatever, man, woman. And so there's always going to be some assumptions, going in. And it's, I think where some people get caught up is they can understand maybe trans folks who have this idea of transitioning from one gender to another. Although most trans folks won't consider it that. They might just say no, I've always been this gender, I've just been bodied a certain way. But some people get caught up on, okay, I get that somebody might go from what they were assigned at birth to something to like maybe man or woman, but this idea of this third gender or this other concept of gender, for me, having no gender is very foreign for folks. And not everyone's gonna get it right away, or understand it, and that it takes time. And it really, what I think Brent was saying earlier too, it takes just honoring and respecting someone who tells you who they are. And that's it took my parents some time. I told them, hey, this is who I am, and they've since 3 or 4 years ago when I came out to them, they've understood quite a lot, and they've honored my pronouns and my new name too, even. So yeah, I don't know if that totally answered your question.
Somewhat. I mean, it sounds like maybe each person might have a different meaning for how they identify with that a word.
Yeah, and I think that that's the key, where it's like agender, non-binary, genderqueer, like it all is kind of the same world, and like trans, it's because ultimately what these words are all for me, I think, and probably for you, and probably for all people, is it's words that feel good for us. It's the words that we use to articulate our experience moving through the world, and so like it's gonna be particular, just in the same way that being a man and a woman is particular to everyone in the room, right? Like so is all of these words, and so all it really is like there's kind of a general sense of them, but again, it's going to be specific to every person. And so that, to me, is just more like, if someone says that and you're like, I don't know, like asking them what they mean by it. Like, that's always the question I wish I got, which was like, what do you mean? Like, what does being a trans man mean for you? Not just like, I looked up this Google definition of it, and like, because for me, being a trans man might be very different than other men walking through the world, you know? And so I think that that's the biggest thing for me with these labels, is that it's personal. In the same way, again, being a man or a woman is personal to cisgender people. Mm-hmm.
So I was just going to say that they, them, their pronouns kind of imply that there's two or multiple, right? So it sounds plural. So it's interesting to me, your explanation to say, well, I'm none, like no gender, but I'm going with just the term because it indicates I'm not a he or a she.
Yeah. So there is a misconception that I heard in your question. There's historically they them actually has been used for singular pronouns. An example, I guess, could be like you're walking down the street and you find $100 bill on the ground. And you or someone else might think to themselves, oh, and I just used it right there, themselves, you know, that's one person. But they might think to themselves, like, oh, I'm so sad that this person lost their $100 bills. I hope they're not too sad about it. You know, and they say they in that sentence. So historically, actually, they them has been a singular pronoun. It's just more widely known as a plural indicator, but it still is singular too.
I think it's in a contemporary sense too. It's funny because I tutored the ACT, and in standard written English, it's only allowed to be plural, but like we use it all the time, like every day. It's like in the same way that we don't hear the grammar rules all the time. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is we do use it, like you said, in a contemporary sense, all the time. It was so funny because this would happen to me in school when I was in acting classes. It's like my professors like wouldn't be able to use my pronouns and wouldn't use they for me, but then would turn around and like refer to characters and refer to people in the room and refer to like, so when you're doing this like exercise with your partner, make sure they do this and then make sure that then they do that. And I was like, but then they turn around and they couldn't call me they because that doesn't make sense. And I was like, oh my God. Like, so it's a thing of, I think we just get nervous about it because we've never tried it in that way, but we do it, you know, it's something that is familiar to us. We just kind of got to like ease into it in a way and like be like, okay, like, I think people don't use, and tell me how you feel about this, I think people don't use they because they feel like they're doing something wrong. Like that person can't be that. But again, it goes back to believing that person and what they say, who they say they are. Yeah. So, yeah. And
as Brent alluded to earlier, there are a million different pronouns that folks can use. They, them is the most common gender neutral, I guess. But there's also zim, there's z here. There's a million different ones that I couldn't name right now. Because I honestly have only met a handful of folks who have used pronouns other than he, him, his, she, her, and they, them, theirs. And for me, I use they, them, theirs as a gender neutral because I just haven't felt particularly tied to any others. And it also, strangely enough, is easier to grasp than z, here pronouns. That because it sounds so foreign to folks, and to me too. You know, it's out of my mouth. It sounds foreign, but that's just because we're not practiced in it, like Hal said. Yeah.
And through the project, I've worked with some people several times, and sometimes their pronouns have changed, or they use two sets of pronouns, but they tell me that today they prefer if I use one set of pronouns.
And that's, I mean, so for me, right, like for a long time when I first came out as non-binary, and then I over the course, so that was about almost 3 years ago now, and then just in the past year or so, I've started to use just he, him, and then in between that, I was using they and he. For me, I still use. I'm not uncomfortable with they. Like I still use they. I just have, and I'm not uncomfortable with it anyway. So like I should probably say like I use he, him, or they, them. Like they're both good. But it's been really important for me, and I've transitioned to he, him, and to being a trans man because it's been important to me to live as a man and disrupt what that means. And so that has been more of my work, and it's felt more like where my work lies, rather than in existing in outside of the categories of men and women. I feel like, given how I understand myself, and also as an actor who plays a lot of men, that like I am very adamant that someone who looks like me and acts like me can also be a man. And so that has been, and also be male. That's been like something lately too that I've that my body is also male, right? Because our bodies are not inherently what they are. They're what the words we give them. And so like my body can be male because I've named it for that. The same way that we just name other people's bodies what we think they are. And so that's why I've transitioned to he, him, because I've just come into this understanding of my gender as being a man's and that I can be that. Not, that's the way I express myself can be that. And so I've used they, them less because he, him has, for me, and this isn't true of everyone, I feel like this is not true for most people, it's actually forced me to engage more in dismantling binary ideas of gender by living in a binary gender. But that's been my experience, and that's not true of like everyone, obviously. A lot of people feel the best way they can do that is by living outside of being a man or a woman. And also, it's not just about disrupting gender. I don't know, like trans people are just like, I'm just here because I want to disrupt things. Like, it's just who we are, that's just been my, like I said, as an actor, someone who exists publicly on stage, I think about that a lot. But also I just feel like a man. So like that's, when it comes down to it, that's as simple as it is sometimes, and I understand myself that way. And so that's why I just use he, him, and I don't use they as much, especially publicly. I try to use he, him in a lot of ways, but I think they, them is very important too. And so many of my friends use they, them. So,
yeah, there's, Hal said that at one point he had used multiple sets of pronouns, he, him, and they, them. I actually have several friends who do that, and it's not, anyone can use any sets of pronouns that they want. They can identify as any gender they want. It's all about, like we've been saying, is accepting and believing that and honoring that.
Yeah, and I never feel like that my friends use multiple sets of pronouns or switch on any given day. It never feels like a burden to me because I'm like, thanks for letting me know where you're at. Like, you know what I mean? I was like, I just want to know that. Like, I want to know where my friends are, how they're at, and how they're feeling. And so it's like good information to have, same thing with name changes and all of that. I'm like, I feel honored that you feel comfortable enough to tell me that. And I can respect that.
Yeah, and I guess you remind me of something too, that this concept of, okay, but what if I meet a trans person or someone who uses X set of pronouns and I screw up? I don't use that correct set of pronouns. Are they going to hate me forever? And like, no. Like everyone messes up pronouns. Actually, just earlier, Hal used the wrong pronouns for me. And we've known each other for 4 years. Whatever, like.
I was like, what?
And so it happens.
Yeah.
And the best thing to me when people mispronoun me is acknowledging it is great. Which Hal did, and then honestly just moving on, and that's honestly the best part. Is just okay. You acknowledged it enough to know that I wish to use different pronouns, and that's just the best thing. Every trans, non-binary, etc. person is gonna feel differently about that, but I'd say a lot of people just feel good that you acknowledge it and strive to use the pronouns that they ask you to.
So what are other things that people do when they make a mistake? Like, let's talk about what that it
That
feels
looks like. Yeah, well, so for me, when people, there's some people who the only time I really get mad is when I've told someone and then they proceed to not do it. Or they do it wrong and then ignore it, because for me that feels like you're not even acknowledging that you made a mistake. You know what I mean? So when someone makes a mistake and then it goes, oh wait, I'm like, thank you for recognizing that you do see me, but that shows me you're learning. You know, like when you make a mistake but then correct yourself, I'm like, oh, you're saying, no, I see you who you are, but I'm learning a new skill that I've never done before. When I've told someone like over and over again, or I have to remind someone, you know, I'm like, you're just not even seeing me. You're just not even acknowledging. You think that you're not even making a mistake, but the fact is you're just saying something wrong. Like this isn't even a matter of like, well, I can't get it because like it's new to me and like, you know, it's something I never learned, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, well, but you're just saying that you're calling me something entirely false. You know, this isn't like a debate, you know. Pronouns aren't up for debate. They just are. And so that's what I always say too. I feel like when people blow over it, or I've told them and all that, it gets, that's where it gets exhausting, because it feels like you can't see me. When it's strangers, I find it starts to get frustrating depending on how much it happens in one day. But you kind of got to start, I find like I have to keep living my life, because like I can't, got to pick my battles, you know. And so it feels invalidating still, but I'm not going to have a conversation with a random person at the restaurant I work at about how they need to use my pronouns, because I'm never going to see them again, as much as sometimes I'd like to. I have a job to do, and so like I need to worry about being seen where I need to be seen, and so they don't get to know that like intimate part of me.
So I do want to invite people to the gallery, but maybe we'll what always happens is once people start asking questions as a group, then it's time to leave. So, but let's go out and look at the pictures. You're welcome to stay in here and ask questions as well, but let's all come back in here maybe at 7:55. Yeah. Okay. And I think that looking at so those pieces out there, those are specific questions that I've asked individuals, and each of them are different based on the generalization of what we talked about. So you'll understand where what the project is about if you look at those, but just skim them. So maybe you saw something out there that you were questioning a term for something, or a story that you read. But hopefully you have questions.
I saw a term. It's woman, but spelled with an X instead of an A. What is that, and how does it function?
So I don't know if you've run across this term before.
Have you?
So I think I might know what it is, but also I don't think either of us have ever used this term. So take this as a very I don't know, breeze through of it. Also, Google is your friend. Also, anyone who actually uses the term is your friend. So what I think it is someone who identifies as a woman, but as a queer woman. Also, maybe not, they weren't assigned at birth woman, so they might be trans. It's, to me, a way to, from what I understand, a way to subvert womanhood into being a more diverse term. Yeah, for women of all, more inclusive, I guess. Women of all bodies, of all whatever backgrounds. Yeah.
Experiences. Yeah.
Yep.
A lot of times X's are used that way. In the queer community in particular, it's used to like you'll see folks, but instead of a K, it's with an X. And it's just saying to be an inclusive term for people of all identities, backgrounds. It's a way to be not neutral, but kind of acknowledge that there's difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
There's, what's the X term in Spanish?
People will say Latinx instead of Latina or Latino. In a way to say again, Latinx people of all backgrounds, right? Not just men or women.
Yeah, it's I lived in Spain, and they started when I left. I lived with a bunch of artists, and they were all talking about how So in Spanish, it's a very dichotomous language, and they started using an E instead of an A or an O.
Yeah,
to
yeah,
try and
yeah.
like
Yeah.
no tres, no tres. And it was interesting. I'd never heard of it. That's actually where I learned about it
Yeah,
before
cool.
coming back to the US. So it's
Cool.
I
interesting.
love that.
Thanks for sharing.
One person that talks about that specifically is Miko. And so I don't know if they have it on their question and answer out there, but in the interview on the website, we talk about that a lot. My husband happens to be from Costa Rica, so.
Very cool.
Other questions?
There are no bad questions.
If I don't know and maybe can't ask, is they the best, safest choice? I work in a hospital, somebody comes in unconscious, I can't ask them.
Right.
If I use they, is that a safe
That's
first choice
definitely
if I
how I
don't know
feel.
better?
That's definitely how I feel.
I haven't had, I never declare myself as an expert on any of the answers of this, by the way, but I've never had a question of if I can't ask someone. So I haven't thought about that.
That's a really good thing you bring up. Like, I generally speaking, like, if I don't know someone's gender when I walk down the street, I'm trying to talk about them, I use they. Like, and I do with, like, my friends and such. And, like, especially in healthcare, because, like, I get, especially in healthcare, even when they could ask me, they don't call me by the right thing. And so, like, I know that, like, I would appreciate if I was unconscious, even though I use he, if I was the person who didn't assume. And like, even because my gender marker doesn't say am right now, my name is not legally my name. And so like, I know that when I go into like, that makes me nervous in a situation like that. Like if something were to happen to me, I'm nervous. I am nervous about being misgendered and where I'm going to be put in a hospital and where I'm going to be put and how they're going to refer to me and what they're going to call me when I'm in a crisis situation. And so if there are people, am I in that kind of situation, they're referring to me neutrally, I would appreciate that. Like, even though I don't use they, just because it's tricky for trans people, and when you're in crisis as a trans person, that's like, you don't want to be dealing with, that's like, you know, that makes it hard to go into spaces. And so, like, I don't know, like, I don't know that people would get mad at you for using they until you know. You know? Like, I don't.
That's definitely how I, exactly what Hal said.
Yeah.
Like when I'm just walking along the street, and we pass by. I'm in a group with a group of friends. We pass by somebody, and I say, oh, they have a really nice dress on, and I'll use they just because I haven't asked them their pronouns. We either haven't had the opportunity, or it just hasn't come up. When I'm in a new space too. Where maybe I don't feel comfortable coming out and using my pronouns, or no one has asked me my pronouns, or maybe I haven't even felt comfortable asking other people pronouns, because that happens sometimes too. I'll still use they, them as neutral. And that also, to me, is an indicator of like, okay, like I'm putting that they, them out there that somebody can tune in and say, and think like, okay, I understand, I see that you're using gender neutral language. So maybe, they might be more comfortable around me in a sense. Hal also brought up an interesting thing about in healthcare. There are lots of trans folks who go through medical surgeries or medical, they might take hormones for various things for trans folks. But not everyone does. And so that can be a concern for some folks, but not for everyone. So yeah, that's just another thing. Like I've never gone through any surgery. I don't plan to. I'm comfortable with my body. I just don't. I'm not a man. That's just how I feel. So, yeah.
Yeah, because you can't. I mean, this sounds. I remember thinking about this when I was first coming out and suddenly realizing that like walking. Someone's gender was not my business. Like I remember, because like one of the first things we do when we walk down the street is gender people. We don't even think about it. We just think we know who they are. And like I had to like really sit and like remove that from my assumptions about people and like be like, hey, actually I can't know. I have to ask. Like it's just like any part of their identity I can't assume things about. Think I know their experience walking through the world. That's another thing. And it took a lot. I had to like very consciously untie that from my like seeing someone and gendering them immediately. I really had to like tease that out and like untie it, especially when it first came out. Just because like I wanted to respect people's ability to know themselves instead of assuming that I somehow knew something more about them than they didn't. Like I knew more about them than they did. And so, yeah, and especially, it comes up especially in situations like healthcare or any sort of like legal sort of system when like you get these documents and like documents that say who they think you are, it's real tough. And so, especially if you don't have the means or the abilities to go through that legal process, it can be really tough. And not all trans people do or want to, but that doesn't make them less of who they are, both legally or medically, would make them less of who they are.
I work at the Science Museum, and we've been doing a lot of work with some great professional development trainings around understanding pronouns and equity and access. And we run these summer camps. What was interesting about 5 years ago, we worked with the instructor team, and they just really challenged us about even, relearning ways to do things like, all right, boys and girls, or even having children, even the youngest of children, line up as boys and girls in a line, just making these assumptions about, even at young ages as they may be exploring and trying and setting up non-gender or gender bathrooms. Bathrooms are a big deal. I can see. We read a great book. We have a book club called Becoming Nicole. Perhaps but there was twin boys and one chose to transition of those twin brothers, and so it was. But she talked a lot about the challenge in school of which bathroom do you go into. She was identifying as female, and this was it was a great insight into those struggles, especially in those early elementary and middle school years.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there are experiences that you could share kind of around that whole part of life.
I don't know much about early childhood with pronouns, because I came out when I was 20. But I've heard a lot about it, and like you were encouraged to think of, it sounds like, gender neutral language. I think that's great. Also, just what you made me think of this, just this idea also of some folks. So they them can be challenging for some folks, and another easy thing to instead of assuming someone's gender, you just use their name. And that's a whole nother kind of, you kind of have to think about how to restructure your sentences around like, Rue told me this, and then Rue, you could just use the name over and over and over again. It seems repetitive, but it's still a pronoun, and it's still what, if someone introduces you their name, they're still going to feel, hopefully, that they like being called that. So that's an alternative to if you don't catch on to they them right away, if you're struggling with it, you can always just use people's names.
Yeah, and I think with like young kids, right? Like, 'cause we can't know and they can't know, and like why it's important. So if I'm thinking about when I was a kid, I just didn't even know trans people existed until I like went to college. And so like, had I known, would I have like come out younger? Maybe not. We don't know. Would I have like realized that about myself? I don't know. But I do know that was. I was very much like, so maybe I would have understood myself, maybe I wouldn't, but there was always something there. It was always something, and I don't know if it called like I've always known I was a boy, because that's not a narrative that makes sense to me, because that's not true. And so as far as like if I had been kind of exposed to this idea that gender is not so fixed, I probably could have started to name and like let myself breathe in that a little bit more than I did. Where before, like growing up, I'd be like, nope, that is, we are not going there. That is, and I was an actor. I only played boys on stage, and I should have known. But like, and I was always cast as boys in high school, and like that was the only way for me to be trans when I was younger, was through performing, which is why one of the reasons I'm an actor now. And it was my only way to express that, but I was never able to name it. So like, if I had teachers, camps, that sort of thing, just like a language around that, and a language that was used in a positive manner, because my only exposure was through side comments made about gender nonconforming people, about dismissive things, about like that being wrong,
bad or,
ugly, bad. And so like any sort of feeling like that in me, even though I couldn't name it, was like, we're gonna just shove that down. Like we're not gonna talk about that until like I got exposed to people who were like living their truth and it was positive and good. And like it was something that could be celebrated, that I started to go, oh, maybe it's gonna be okay. Like, you know.
Yeah.
So, which is why I continue to do the work I do. Because I never saw a trans person that I knew of on stage growing up or in stories. So I try to just show up in these worlds and be like, hello, we exist, we're here. You know, for both trans people and non-trans people. So
And that's how talking about his like time growing up reminds me that like another thing about like just being trans or non-binary, just like I think just helps people reflect on their level of masculinity or femininity, and that's what's been like what I've really explored in my gender, is just like the masculine traits I have, the feminine traits I have. You know, growing up, I was raised a boy, and I did a lot of masculine things, and I did a lot of feminine things, and I also did a lot of masculine things very femininely. And so it's I don't know, it's not as simple as like this black and white. We're all both, and we need to embrace both. So yeah, I don't know. I think that for me, like just teaching kids, if you are in that situation, I would encourage them just to explore their gender in all senses. But that's not really answering your question.
yeah, I think so too. And that like it's, you know, like they were saying, it's like about like a larger truth. So I think like I don't think trans and non-binary folks we aren't some like political thing that came out of the woodwork in the past few years, right? Like we've always been around, right? Especially in like, it's especially new in like Western white culture, because there's all sorts of cultures historically and across the world that have had third genders, have had people be now considered trans, but that's like might not what they call themselves. Like people like us have been around forever in all sorts of societies and all sorts of cultures. And we're often like revered. You know, our understanding of this is like something that is wrong and bad has only come from like the power structures that we have built over time, specifically in this society we live in now, right? And so I think like trans people and non-binary people embody this sort of larger truth about like us knowing ourselves. We know who we are. You know, we can choose how and when we share that with other people in the world. You know, it's just like it becomes very apparent in trans and non-binary people because we have to fight for that. We have to really, really fight to be seen for who we are. Like Brent said, like, you know, we live our lives not being seen for who we are, or sometimes, or not all the times, we're being very uncertain. And so you have to become very clear about who you are and how then you communicate that to those around you. We all do that all the day, every day, all the time. It's just depends on how and when who you're challenged by on that. And trans and non-binary people get challenged on who they are a lot. And so for me, it's about, you know, especially talking about kids, it's like allowing them to like, giving them the opportunity to like narrate their experience and their bodies for how they understand them and how they live in that for themselves, and encouraging them will only let them come to their own understanding instead of putting it on them. So.
Any other questions?
I'll keep thinking. So, like I said, the project started out as me thinking I would just be taking photos of people, and then I started to realize the questions that I was asking people for myself to hear the answers were important for other people to hear them. So then I started to interview people, but I was only thinking it would be short YouTube clips. And I needed an answer to a solution to the problem that people weren't able to gain everything I was gaining from these conversations I was having with people. And what that became was the podcast. Are there people here who don't know what podcasts are? Good. So there's a podcast, and you can listen to all of these people's interviews. And if you think about it, if you're driving in the car, if you're at work and able to have headphones on, it's everyone who has started to do that that's like close to me has messaged me back saying how powerful it is. And that's really a great way to continue this type of conversation, where you can just, listen to people's stories.
What is the podcast called?
They Them Project.
Okay.
Yep. And all of this exists on the website theythemproject.org. It actually redirects to my website. I don't know if I even declared myself as a photographer, but I run a photo studio in South Minneapolis. I do portraits through that, and then I also am a commercial photographer, and I started all of that in Los Angeles. So I'm not trying to end this discussion yet, but I do have cards here for headshots, portraits, but then They Them Project actually exists on this white card, which is my commercial, I call it my commercial celebrity art activist work. So that's where They Them Project exists. So you're welcome to take one of those to be able to listen to those podcasts. Or on iTunes, it exists there, or Google Play. But please have more questions.
Are you, go ahead. Are you still looking for more participants?
Yeah, so I've actually traveled with the project as well, which is what I wanted to, because I've interviewed a lot of people locally. And then when I have done bigger shoots in Los Angeles, New York, and I actually did one in Alton, Illinois last year, I've interviewed people from there. And now where I want to take the project, this is something brand new, I actually want to start to do group discussions, because I feel like what people can gain from those interviews is from a cis, respectful, ignorant perspective, asking questions to gain understanding. And I've kind of done that, and that exists for people to listen to. And what I want to do now is group interviews that have specific topics. So like Hal is an actor, and I know other actors who, and the only rule of the project is that you currently or previously have to accept gender nonconforming pronouns. So maybe what I'll do now is I'll get 5-6 people into a group, and we can talk. I can interview them individually quickly, ask those generic questions that I've started all of this with, but then we can start to have a discussion. They can start to have a discussion about having trans experience with those topics. And I think that's going to be powerful as well.
I just wanted to say, we have this race exhibit at the museum, and what I find, your photos, by the way, are just really beautiful. They're really stunning. They have an element of that exhibit that shows pictures of people, and it's about the assumptions made about what their race is. So there'd be this young woman, and you might think, she looks Hispanic, and she ends up being, Swedish, Filipino, Hispanic, 4 or 5 different, so it's just the idea that there's so, people are so complex in terms of, ethnicity and race is a, a construct, a social construct, but it's sort of the same way you're almost capturing people and express, they get to define who they are versus the viewer. There's an interesting comparison between race and sexual orientation or ethnicity.
I have a question. My name is Nancy. My pronouns are she and her.
Thank you.
I'm lesbian. Been lesbian for 35 years, and so I'm wondering. I'm sort of out of touch with the younger community, so I'm sort of wondering what happened to the butch dykes and the effeminate men. Are they still around? Or I mean, I can think of a friend, a couple people, one in particular. I mean, she was a butch dyke, and masculine is anything. And I'm wondering if now. She would not, if she were younger, if she would be calling herself he and him. So I'm wondering, are there still just, plain old garden variety lesbians who are kind of butchy?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question because I as a trans man, I've gotten that a lot, where people assume I'm like a butch dyke, right? And the thing is, I identify as a gay man. I identify a faggot, right? Like, you know, it's like that's how I, you know, and so I think that all those people still exist, and maybe that person would have or maybe not. But I know lots of people who are also like gender nonconforming, non-binary, trans masculine, trans men, but have all sorts of different sexualities. So I think, and I know people who are just I consider myself an effeminate man, right? Like I consider myself a feminine man, you know? And so like, yeah, we all do, I think exist, but they come in trans and non-trans, you know what I mean? So I think so, and it's a really interesting, because that's, especially from folks who are part of the LGBT community, I get that question a lot, you know, like, but like, what do you have been this, but I was like, and the thing I was like, I'm gay, like, you know, and so it's like, it's a interesting, like, so yes, they do still exist.
Okay.
But also like,
Depends on how they define themselves.
it depends on how they define themselves, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think I think butches still exist, but also trans men who maybe previously identified that way exist, and there's trans men who identify as lesbians, you know, but like there's trans men like me who identify as gay, and like there's trans men who, you know, and so and then there's obviously, you know, and there's trans women who identify as lesbians, you know what I mean? Like, and there's, you know, and so it's again, like that sexuality and gender are separate, and as many genders as there are sexualities and combinations that go between them. So, you know, that's a conversation happening, I think, if, you know, in like cis lesbian and cis gay men communities is about trans people, because like I get from a lot of cis gay men is that like, they're like, well, you're not a man. And I'm like, yeah, I am. Yeah, you know, and so it's a really interesting conversation between like cis gay and lesbian communities and trans folks, and like how that like comes up. And so yes, they all exist. All of them exist, and like the sexuality part of it really just varies from person to person, of course.
And I think this is, you know, having non-binary pronouns, you know, like this, pronouns have always existed, like Hal said earlier. I think they're just more recently becoming mainstream, and there's more discussion around them. And so I think this is like a new wave of queer and LGBTQ. You know, like it's a new era, in a sense. And I also had something else. I don't know.
Well, I think a lot of the young folks too. A lot of young folks are identifying as queer. They're kind of just like,
yeah,
I'm not straight, but you know, who knows? You know, like when I see someone, you know, I can say I identify as a gay man, but also I'm like, I don't know who this person's gender is. I just know they're hot. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's like very. It's a like I think among young people there's a little bit more movement, like fluid about things, a little bit more like I can't assume, so I'm gonna let it be what it is. Like, you know, there's like a little more of that sort of thing, right? Especially with non-binary folks. Like I don't want to exclude non-binary folks from my attraction, you know. So like it's.
But that's also what's really challenging being a young person and then having like my parents and all these old people saying, what are you? Like, explain this to me. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to label it right now. I'm still exploring everything.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's really a difficult thing because you want everyone to understand and accept you, but you also don't have to label it and don't have to understand for yourself right away. So it's just a big challenge.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I hear that so hard. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
think in discussions Hal and I have had too. I've just said like I just want to exist sometimes. You know, like I just want to hang out. Like in a social like situation where I'm just new to like a lot of people. Like I just want to exist. I just want to have fun too. So like it's challenging when like you do want to be respected and you do want to figure out who you are, but also like you just want to exist and interact with folk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you're just figuring it out. Yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
it's a lot. It's
It
a lot.
is. Especially when you're just figuring it out. Like I felt a lot of pressure when I first came out to have to articulate what it was. Otherwise, no one was going to even like let me be in the struggle of it. You know what I mean? And that's what I feel like to me and my understanding of being trans is to always be in movement. So how could I ever capture it? You know what I mean? It's anyone who knows me knows that I'm more gender blurry than just being a man. Like, you know what I mean? But like, I gotta present, like, especially as an actor, that I'm a trans man. You're gonna cast me as a man. You're gonna see me as a man. You know, because that's what I have to do to walk through the world. But like, the truth of it is like, but we don't prioritize that doubt and that like questioning and that like being in process around gender. We just demand answers and we demand product instead of like being in process and asking questions and letting things kind of just like come up.
I remember in your interview, Al, that you were one of the first, if not the first, people in the project to like stop and say, "Can I ask you a question?" And just ask, "What have you learned about your gender through this project?" And so, and it was like an aha moment for me to think about all that. And I again would invite everyone here just to think about that for yourself, because most likely you don't have this or that for answers for what decides gender. And again, that can help you relate to other people.
Yeah. So, let's see. I'm curious about the dynamic that was just spoken of as it relates to the difficulty and frustration you must feel when you feel like you're being challenged because someone wants to understand what are you. Like and I have a stepdaughter who identifies as queer, and I have come to understand that I cannot ask nor expect her to be the one that is going to help me to be more well-versed and more conscious of the things that I want to and need to be conscious of. So I get that. But sometimes it feels a little bit like I could use some empathy. I'm sure that I might be making a really big mistake in saying that, but I want so desperately to be able to and do the right thing that it's and that's really hard. It's really hard to feel like I'm at risk all the time of offending someone.
So, I mean, one answer to that is literally these interviews will give you that space to better understand. And you're going to hear 30 different people's definitions of themselves and all the definitions that we're talking about, and which will be different for each person. So that's an opportunity to better understand things without one person from the project, when talking about the idea of you learn someone is trans and then you want to ask them questions, they said, "I'm not your trans barista.
Right.
I'm not serving information." And that, I mean, it's very tiring because ultimately that could happen every day for those people.
I get it. I really do. It's the same. I mean, Black people don't need to teach me about race. I mean, I do get that, and I really did not mean to make this about me.
No.
It's.
I'll tell you. I've gotten that a lot, especially from my parents.
I'm sure you have.
I want some empathy here, sort of thing. So it's real. So everyone's hurting in this space. You know, you can't until there's common ground and common understanding. That's honestly a lot of the reality, and that sucks. What I will say is, it starts from the relationship and goes from there. As far as you're here right now trying to learn more, so that's great. That's phenomenal. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. And not every trans and non-binary person is gonna feel open and have energy in any given situation to be able to have those conversations.
Right.
It's tough when you're close to them. I will say, I have had a lot of conversations with my family, with my parents especially, and sometimes I do get very frustrated, and I don't want to talk about it anymore. And space is very good. Space is a very good thing for everyone, myself especially, but for anyone in this conversation. Honestly, yes, you want to like know all the things and do the research or whatever, but also you want to make sure you're okay, like too, you know, like you also matter, so do I, you know, like so does, you know, whoever you're interacting with. And so one, you have to take care of yourself too first. Second, you have to question yourself. And third, you have to seek understanding and just try to reach a common ground with whoever you're interacting with and a common respect, hopefully. Thank you for bringing this up. That's the biggest question, you know, like how do I continue to have good conversations with these queer folks who are in my life, while also honoring, respecting them, and also, you know, it's a whole thing.
And to follow up with that, and kind of like what I have found is like, so, and is that like for me, and this isn't just like people, from what I've seen with people interacting with me, and then also when I interact with others, is when I'm interacting with someone who's different than me, I'm not trying to interact, you know, with a different identity in particular. I don't want to just like, I want to know what their experience is of them walking through the world as a whole person, which is inherently going to be about their identity. So I'm not expecting them, if they're, for example, like Black, to be like, tell me about being Black is in the world. I'm like, well, but your experience of that's going to be so different than everyone, you know, so I just need to understand. I'm not going to say, tell me about, but I'm like, I just want to know about you. It also takes me saying, I don't know. It takes a huge level of humility, you know, for me to get, because I think that that's where I find I run into a lot of tension with people, is that they won't say, I don't know to me. They'll say, tell me what it is so I can know and check it off. They won't say, I don't know. And like, can I know more? And I'm never mad about that.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to accept my experience as being true, you know, but I get challenged on it being true because they're like, well, that doesn't fit what I knew, and so blah, 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 and this and that and the other thing. And so it's really like, for me, even in what I've experienced from other people and from approaching others, is like, it's a, hey, I don't know, and I want to, and I don't have any expectations, and it's just taking that, like, it's being really humble about all of it, you know.
Russell, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, I was thinking that I've known 3 Black trans women on the street, and one that I grew up with from little, and I met 3 trans women in prison, in a men's prison, and because they hadn't fully had everything done, they were put into a men's prison. And I'm, with all respect, I can't imagine asking any of them what their pronouns are. I know lesbian women, Black women, that kind of really turned me onto the whole ideal and asked me what my pronouns were, and I was so ignorant, I just said Mr. They called me Mr. Russ.
That is a pronoun. that is a pronoun.
Okay. I was called a little off guard. Come from a long time ago.
When if or when you listen to the interviews, you'll find out that the very first question that I asked to every single person is, would there ever be a time you would be upset if someone asked you what pronouns you use? And every single time in the project, the answer has been no, with the exception of one person who now identifies as a woman, and that's how she would want to be looked at.
How long has this been?
Probably about 2 years now.
2 years.
Yeah. But I've started to realize the power of introducing yourself and giving your pronouns, and how that is an invitation to other people then to give their own. So especially in Minnesota, we don't want to be mean and we don't want to ask someone and offend them by asking them. So if there's only one thing that people take away from tonight, it's that you can introduce yourself and give your pronouns so that other people can give theirs. And that's more of an invitation as opposed to I need you to tell this to me.
That's great.
I know we're coming close, or
Yeah.
we're past time, but I wanted, I think if you already know what somebody's pronouns are, then you don't necessarily need to ask them, is my take. So if you're going into work with somebody who you know is a trans woman who uses she, her pronouns, I would understand why you would hesitate to then ask them what their pronouns are, because I could see that coming off as like you're not believing that they are a woman. So that I think is a different context than if you like are just meeting somebody for the first time and you're not sure what context they're coming from. But I think that is a question that is worthy of exploration, but generally genderqueer people say that it's not offensive to ask.
Well, and this just goes back to every individual is every person's different. Some people are going to find some things offensive, some things aren't, somebody aren't, some people aren't, and I mean, you just gotta roll with the punches. You just gotta go with it. As challenging as it can be, and somebody might have a bad day and they might explode, and we all do that. But
I wanted to also name I might have misunderstood a couple of the comments, but it seemed like there were some alluding comparison between race and gender in the conversation. And I just want to say that I don't think that's an appropriate comparison. I think what is similar is that people make assumptions about people's appearances and backgrounds, and that is what causes hurt and pain across different ways of identifying.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, that was my
because it's kind of come up a couple times.
Racism and transphobia show up in the world completely differently, and so yes.
I think I was more responding to the photo images.
And
But thank you.
That is a question that I started to ask people of color in the project, and then I realized I also could be asking everyone else in the project. So again, in the interviews, you can hear people's answers to that, and again, they're all very different answers.
And then Culver, to your question or your point, there are spaces like Transforming Families and other groups that actually have care groups for parents and families of trans people to kind of cultivate that empathy or sense of community. Because like one thing that they share with people is that genderqueer trans folks, or really anybody that comes out about something, is thinking about it. Has a process of it before they come out, and then the people have to go through their own process. So people do have an understanding that it makes sense that people have to go through that process, and just the person that's coming out might not actually have the capacity to handle supporting you going through your process. And that's really what it's about. But that's why, there are these groups and there are resources like this, but that's why there's also people like Hal and, Rue. And I also consider in certain contexts, me one of those people. I'm Ray, by the way, if I didn't introduce myself. To then have conversations with people as being like, I've named myself as a person who's willing to do some of that work because I'm at a place in my journey where I have the capacity to be able to actually do that, because I do think that you're deserving of that empathy. And then also encouraging, like, how can you cultivate that for yourself, right? So that, when someone is offended, that you're able to do some of that caregiving on your own.
Thank you.
thanks, Ray.
I think we can end on that. Again, the project is They Them Project. So if you just Google They Them Project, it'll come up. Otherwise, it's theythemproject.org. Otherwise, it's on the white card. You're welcome to take both of those. You're welcome to ask any other questions as people are leaving too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.